evening, everyone. My name is Ben Dworkin. I am the founding director of the Rowan Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship, known as RIPAC. And on behalf of Rowan University and the Institute, I want to welcome all of you to our evening with the Honorable Ray Lesniak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Before we begin, I'd like everyone to please take out their cell phone.
And shut it off?
First, you gotta take a selfie. Everybody, come on, take the selfie with all of you. Show, and then post it on your social media. Amanda, come on. Thank
Me too?
Yeah, sure. Come on, we'll get you. And then you can post it.
Wait. I'm 77. What's a selfie? This is good, right?
That's good.
Oh, that's the guy right there.
Hit that one. Okay.
All right.
And when you get a chance, you post that on social media. And once that's done, then please, yes, turn off your phone.
Kevin will take care of that. No, Kevin will post it.
Okay.
You can wait until all right.
At this point, I just need to go through a couple of our introductory things, and part of that is to thank our Rowan co-sponsors, which include a number of places here that are supporting tonight's event: the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Department of History, Department of Law and Justice Studies, Department of Political Science and Economics, and the Martinson Honors College. And I do want to acknowledge, as you see in your program, the strong financial support of the New Jersey Education Association, the New Jersey Hospital Association, New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance, NJM, and LIUNA, the Laborers International Union, all of whom have helped underwrite this and many other RIPAC programs. The Rowan Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship, as we call it, RIPAC, is dedicated to engaging, informing, and training Rowan students, Rowan faculty, and the public in all matters related to politics, public policy, and citizen participation. We are, in essence, workforce development for democracy. Tonight's program is just part of that engagement and education effort. Here's how tonight's program will work. Senator Lesniak and I are about to have a bit of a conversation about his life and some of the key aspects of his memoir, which I encourage you all to. For those of you who are students, let me say, you are the fortunate of a benefactor who has said, for any current Rowan student here, you get a free copy of this book.
Am I allowed to say who the benefactor is?
No, let's keep that a secret.
His first name is George.
For those,
Sorry. I'm a bad guy, man. I'm sorry.
I want to remind everybody also, just here, that we are on the record. Senator, I want to remind you. We are videotaping this. Look, the book is available for all students, and at the end of the program, the senator will be at the front desk and will be able to sign your copy. For those, unfortunately, they actually sold out of the copies that they had at the bookstore next door at the Barnes & Noble, but we have someone here where you can sign up and they'll get it for you.
Kevin, did you bring extra books? No.
So,
Just what was, okay.
it's available to you. Again, please note that we are taping this program and everything said should be considered on the record. And with that, let us begin. Senator Lesniak, your career in Trenton spans 40 pivotal years of American political history, and absolutely crucial and critical decades when it comes to New Jersey history. There are, in so many ways, you were just there. And that's one of the things that comes from reading your memoir here. You were just there at the moment when all these things were happening. And so
Some things I made happen.
And with that, let me say you were like the Forrest Gump of politics. You are just always at these places when critical moments were happening.
That's true.
And hardly a bit player, a major influence. But since there's so much to cover, I want to try and hit a few different things. And I want to start with your childhood. Where and when were you born? Let's just start with that.
Let's see, Elizabeth, New Jersey. That's way up north. Took me 2 hours to get here. Elizabeth, New Jersey. Where and when? Oh, May 7th. My birthday's coming up. Okay. You know, 1946, right after the war. I'm one of the first baby boomers.
So what were your parents like? What did they do?
Sure. Well, my dad had to quit school in 8th grade to support his family, worked on the docks in Elizabeth. My mom cleaned houses for, homes in the neighborhood.
What was it like growing up in Elizabeth in those days?
I don't remember. No. I mean, it was fun. It was a fun time. Nobody complained. Again, my dad was, had to quit school in the 8th grade. He was the smartest person I've ever known. As a matter of fact, he became a building manager in GAF Chemical Company. And what he resented most was he had to report to his bosses with master's and PhD degrees, but he knew a lot more than they did. So I kind of I think that instilled in me a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, just a little one, right? As a lot of politicians know, I do have a chip on my shoulder, to express myself in no uncertain terms that I think I'm right. It comes across in the book.
What was the influence from your mother's side?
Yeah, she was the politician. She was a Democratic committee woman. Elizabeth had 136 committee people, so it's not like it's a district leader, And so first of all, when I decided I had a rocky road at Rutgers. I dropped out twice, and then I got drafted. And as a matter of fact, I write about this in the book, I believe. I'm sure I do. I was in the Army. I played football and baseball for the First Army. I was very lucky. I didn't go to Nam, thank God. I just followed orders. They wanted me to play ball, so I had to entertain the troops. But I was stationed with lawyers who were going through basic training. I was in the same barracks with these guys. They were going through basic training in advance of going to officer commission school to become lieutenants and colonels and generals. And in the barracks, you start talking to folks, and I'm talking to these lawyers. I'm a 2-time college graduate, dropout, and I realized I'm smarter than these guys. But they're lawyers, and I'm a 2-time college dropout. So when I got out, I went back to Rutgers. I graduated with honors, and I went to St. John's Law School, graduated with honors there. And when I got out, and by the way, when I went to decided to go to law school, my mother accused me of going to law school because I didn't want to get a job. And she was right. So when I got out, she convinced me to go to a Democratic club meeting, and I went because I wanted to meet some young women there, I was just a young college graduate. But I met this very enthusiastic congressional candidate, Adam Levin, who was just also a graduate of law school, but his dad was Phil Levin, who built Madison Square Garden. Multi-millionaire. I volunteered to work on his campaign, and I caught the bug. He never made it, but I did. So that was my mom's, my mom's contribution, amongst obviously many other things. My dad, in terms of hard work, and my mom is in terms of hard work as well, cleaning other people's homes.
I want to talk to you about one of the things you write about is how you understand America. And you describe America not as a melting pot,
casserole.
But as a casserole.
Yes.
So can you explain, What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so first of all, my neighborhood, we were a diverse neighborhood before people even used the word diversity. We had every single ethnic group that I grew up with and that I went to school with. And so instead of a melting pot where everybody loses their identity, I describe America as a casserole where all the different ingredients combine to create a great flavor, but they still have their own individual identity also. And that is what I believe makes America great, not the melting pot, but the fact that all these wonderful different ingredients can work together to make it better.
One of the people who influenced your life, you write about significantly.
Ma Green.
Ma Green.
Ma Green.
So, yeah. So can you tell us who's Ma Green, and how did she come to influence you so much?
Sure. The first female political power broker in New Jersey. And I describe her as, for those of folks who know the George I talked about, as the George Norcross of her time. So she was a political boss. And at that time, we had a large Polish-American population. My grandparents were born in Godowa, Poland, right on the border of Ukraine. That's why I'm so much involved in helping out the Ukraine effort against Putin's invasion. But anyway, so she wanted to get Polish Americans involved in politics. She was involved in politics. She controlled a block of voters.
Was she a very old lady at the time when you got involved?
Well, she wasn't young.
Okay.
She wasn't young, but she had a lot of power because she controlled this large political block of Polish voters. Plus, she understood campaign contributions. She was a realtor, and her husband was in insurance business, so they contributed. Again, they made politics work. And basically, she forced me upon the Democratic Party organization, which wasn't particularly wanted me. But when you read the book, how I got there, it's complicated to explain. But our Democratic Party chairman, it was like a Picasso painting, how he overcome the opposition to me because I was an upstart, from the more seasoned veterans who were involved. How it was done was it's just remarkable to read about. But, and you'll read about it in the book, I was basically responsible for Brendan Byrne being reelected.
We'll get to that. I'm gonna go through the governors in a second, but just.
Yeah, but not me, the political process that got there. Okay.
Did you always when did you first realize you had an ambition for elected office?
When I went to that political meeting and heard Adam Levin speak. I was always very opinionated. I was anti-war, even though I was in the Army. But I never thought about politics until that moment, and I started working on this campaign. And I said, this is fun. It's actually fun. Politics was fun. So,
one of the unique parts about your career is that you were in the legislature while there were 7 different governors, each reflecting a very certain time and place in our political history, and each with his or her own personality. I thought it might be illuminating, because you cover so much of this in your book, just to go through them and to sort of get your assessment and perhaps a story or two. So let's start with the late Brendan Byrne.
Right.
What was he like? What was he like to work with?
Sure.
And is there a moment you remember when you and he had a conversation, a fight, or something?
Well, yeah, I was, as I said, I went to the legislature with a chip on my shoulder, and there was redistricting. And by the way, Democrats do gerrymandering just as well as the Republicans do. It all depends on who's in charge. And I had committed Adam Levin, who basically financed my campaign. I had committed to making sure that there was a congressional district for him. As a matter of fact, when I was Democratic State Chair, when you worked for me, I designed a congressional district tailor-made for Bob Menendez to go to Congress. And it was called the Fish Hook. We didn't have any Hispanic congressional members, so I crafted a congressional district that went from Jersey City through the Hispanic areas of Newark and Elizabeth and all the way down to Perth Amboy. They called it the Fish Hook. So, I was the king of gerrymandering at the time. That's how you get ahead in politics. You take advantage of the rules.
So how did gerrymandering affect you and Brendan Byrne?
how did I get off on that topic?
Because you said there was redistricting.
Yeah. Now I know. Yeah. But the leaders, the legislative leaders, the Senate president, the Assembly Speaker, the governor, the congressional delegation wanted a different map. And I had two allies, Democratic allies, who would do anything, Bob Januszewski and Billy Flynn, do anything I asked of them, and we meant the difference in getting stopping their map from being passed. So Harold Hodes, who was the governor's chief of staff, came to me one day because I was blocking all these leaders, and I was blocking me, and what's it take? I said, it doesn't take anything. It takes you adopting the map.
Sorry, just so we're clear, when he says, what's it going to take, meaning,
Yes.
what do you want in order to let this other plan go through?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And I said, nothing, man. I said, you can't. I made a commitment. I'm keeping by it. That's basically what it was. He went to the two guys, Januszewski and Billy Flynn, and I saw him talking to them to try to convince them to drag them, and they just pointed to me. Get him. Hodes went back to Byrne, and Harold Hodes told Governor Byrne, this building's going to come down before Lesniak's going to budge. So.
Was Brendan Byrne, we often hear stories about him being a very funny
Yes.
guy.
You want me to tell my favorite joke?
Sure.
So everybody says the famous best joke of Brendan Byrne was, when I die, I want to get buried in Hudson County so I can keep voting. I like one better, because when he was in the army during World War II, in Italy, and in order to keep the men soldiers away from the beautiful Italian women, they gave them saltpeter. You know what saltpeter is designed to do? Is to suppress your ability.
It's the anti-Viagra.
It's the anti-Viagra. Okay. So he would tell that story, and then he would say, I think it's starting to work. That was my favorite one.
Next governor that you served with was Tom Kean, a Republican. What's your assessment of Governor Kean, of his skills and his record as governor?
I thought he was wonderful. As a matter of fact, I think there's a chapter in the book called Working Together. I passed the most significant environmental protection laws that this nation had, that he signed, and we worked together on them, and that was But there are other things that went on as well. With, as I said, I had a chip on my shoulder. Okay, so I made a commitment. Ma Green. So Ma Green wanted this Polish. We never had a Polish American judge in Union County. So there was, she wanted John Pisanski to be elevated as a lawyer, elevated to the Superior Court. And Tom Kean just wouldn't do it. So there's such a thing called senatorial courtesy in New Jersey, where a senator from the county can sign off on any single governor's appointment where that person lived in your county. So I had a handful of them. They're on sheets. So, and Kean wouldn't appoint John Pisanski to the court. So I walk into the governor's chief counsel, can't remember his name right now.
We went through a few people, John Degnan.
Before that, well, in any event, I said, here's the governor's appointments. I threw them in the waste paper. I said, I'll sign off on them when the governor makes John Pisanski a judge. Kean calls me in. He said, look, I'm not going to do this under that type of threat and pressure. Sign off on my appointments and I'll do the right thing. That's all he said, was I'll do the right thing. I signed off and he appointed John Pisanski as a judge. That is the trust, and he was a Republican and I'm a Democrat. That was the trust that existed amongst politicians in rival camps that virtually does not exist anymore. And that's sad.
Senatorial courtesy is an unwritten rule. It's just a tradition that is followed.
By the way, Kean, before we had that rapprochement, I'm running for election, and the local paper He accused me of being the king of senatorial courtesy.
So, there are many who would question whether it's appropriate, that it's not in the Constitution, it's just a power. What's your view? Do you believe, even now, with the perspective you have, senatorial courtesy is a necessary part of the process?
I do, because the governor, New Jersey's governor, the way it's structured, is the most powerful governor in the country because of all the powers that he has. There's no other statewide elected office. And it's a way for the Senate to balance off that extreme, such a strong power in the governor's office that no other governor has. So for the Senate to have its say in things, we use senatorial courtesy. It's very helpful.
So let me flash.
But like any power, it can be abused.
In 2017, you ran for governor.
I did.
Had you won, would you
Yes.
have the same view about senatorial courtesy?
Yeah, because I'll be able to work with Democrats and Republicans to get things done. It's just, as I said, it works. You just have to make it work, and you just have to have trust in each other in order to make it work. And as I said, unfortunately, by the way, the New Jersey legislature is not nearly as bad as Congress. Congress is a mess, but we get along a lot better here in New Jersey.
The next governor you served under was Jim Florio.
Yes.
From down this area, who recently and tragically passed away. We all miss him. Florio was a one-term governor, and at the same time, you were not just state senator, but you were the chairman of the state Democratic Party.
Correct.
So, two questions here. What was Florio like as governor?
Yeah.
And how much leeway did he give you, because he's the head of the party as the governor, how much leeway did he give you to run the state party as you saw fit?
Yeah, well, he gave me all the leeway I wanted, except for one thing. He controlled the checkbook. So if you control the checkbook, that means you control what the person does. However, I was able to do a lot within that. And as a matter of fact, so he lost re-election to Christy Todd Whitman. And it was a close margin. And on TV, right after the election, Whitman's campaign manager was Ed Rollins, a very famous Republican political strategist. He said on TV, "We won because I paid off African-American ministers to suppress the vote." So I filed suit to overturn the election because he broke the law and bribed people to suppress the vote. Now, interestingly about that, I'm a Democrat. And I'm filing suit to overturn an election based on the fact that African-American ministers were paid off. It doesn't look too good, does it, right? No. So what did I do? I hired the most prominent African-American lawyer, Ted Wells, to represent me. And in Rollins' deposition, I couldn't break him. He said I made it up. It wasn't true. But during the deposition, we broke we took a break, and we both wind up in the bathroom next to each other. And he goes, "You're a tough adversary, man." I said, "Yeah, but I can't break it, man. I can't break it." He said, "Yeah, but you're a tough adversary." So, which reminds me of another time I'm in a bathroom with a politician, Al Gore, vice president. Oh, no, I'm in the bathroom with Bill Clinton. So, who wrote the introduction to the book, by the way. So I'm in the bathroom with him, and we're waiting backstage before going, to some event where we were speaking. And I come out of the bathroom with President Clinton, and I go to Al Gore, who does not have a sense of humor, by the way, if you saw him. I go, I guess I could now say that I had it out with the president. He looks at me and goes, "Oh." Okay, so one other story. A state dinner of the president of South Korea. Now, my firm was general counsel for Samsung North America, biggest company in South Korea. So I was invited to the state dinner, and there's this receiving line, and there's Hillary Clinton, President Clinton, and the president of South Korea and his wife, and you shake hands, you say niceties, and I said to President Clinton, I said, Bill, excuse me, President, I said, I'm looking around. By the way, this is the state dinner for the president of South Korea, okay? I said, I'm looking around and I don't know a soul here. Oh. That's what Clinton said. Right. True story. True story.
I just want to jump
You
back.
got to have fun. If politics isn't fun, don't do it, man. Don't do it. Make it.
Tell that
it
same
has to
thing
be
to my
fun.
students in
There you
first
go.
class.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to get your assessment of Jim Florio. I want to just go back to what was he like as a governor?
Well, I mean, he was good. He was a great governor. I mean, he the fight, and that was what my first environmental protection effort was to help him preserve the pine lands. And he alienated a lot of Democrats, a lot of South Jersey Democrats, because who saw it as stopping development, because this pristine area that had the largest underground water supply for the state of New Jersey was being preserved instead of developed, and where that water would have ultimately been contaminated. So that was a great achievement of his. He banned assault weapons. No, he was a good leader, an excellent governor, a great governor.
We then get to Christine Todd Whitman, our first female governor. Senator, you've been around long enough to see the massive transformation in the way women access politics, run for office, lead. But it's always hard when it's the first time, as Christy Whitman was. So what was your relation, well, let me ask it this way. Was your relationship with Christine Todd Whitman any different because she was female as opposed to a male governor?
Yeah, no, not at all. Let me say, and I thought she was a good governor. By the way, there's one other story I have to tell about my lawsuit against her, because Christy Todd Whitman went to Florio, having defeated him, and I'm suing to overturn the election. And Governor-elect Whitman says, "You got to control Lesniak. Tell him to dismiss this suit." And Florio says, "Control Lesniak? You think I can control Lesniak?" Meanwhile, Florio says, "Go ahead, man, go ahead." So, I didn't have that much interaction with her. I don't remember, strangely, I can't remember any significant piece of legislation I sponsored for her to sign. I don't know why that is. As you remember, she left in midterm in her second, right?
Or at the end, towards the end of her third year
Of her
second term.
of her second term. That's a little. I don't remember anything much about her, quite frankly. So I don't know. I don't want to say anything bad about her. I think she was a good governor. That we didn't have a lot of interaction, and it had nothing to do with her being a woman. As a matter of fact, I have a lot of respect for her now. She's leading an anti-MAGNA movement of the Republican Party, which I think is necessary for the Republican Party to survive.
And now we get to Jim McGreevey, our next governor, someone with whom you had a very close relationship in politics.
Not that close. Sorry.
Some might call you one of McGreevey's
You know what?
mentors.
Can you cut that off the clip, off the TV?
When you first met Jim McGreevey, what made him special as someone, because he was a young guy?
Yeah.
What made him special that you might have recognized that this guy can really go all the way?
His energy. Non-stop, and his ability to deliver a message and stay on it constantly. And he was everywhere. Throughout the whole state of New Jersey, well, first when he was running for mayor of Woodbridge, he knocked on every single door. And he remembered everybody's name, something that I have a hard time doing, quite frankly. But it was just his knowledge, his energy, his ambition. Yeah.
You were actively involved with the events that led to Governor McGreevey declaring in 2004 the famous line, "I am a gay American."
Right.
And thus, for himself, feeling compelled to resign, announced that he would be resigning his office of governor, something that many of the young people here today, in this day and age, often have a hard time understanding. It's more of a so what attitude today than it was then.
Yeah, but because he did not resign because he was gay.
Can you tell us what your take on this?
Well, it's not my take, it's what it was. So he had a lover, Golan Sapel, and he was married. Not good, right? But as I said to the press once, if every politician who had he put Golan Sapel on a payroll. He gave him a job. And I said to the press once, if every politician who put their lover on a payroll had to resign, there'd be 1,000 vacancies tomorrow. But just go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, that'll sink in. That'll sink in. But he appointed him to be his liaison to the Homeland Security Department, and it was right shortly after 9/11. It was a very sensitive position, so that's why he resigned. Not because Golan Sapel was gay, not even because he had an affair with him. As I said, politicians do have affairs. It's not unknown. Bill Clinton did, right? Not with the prostitute, though.
Yes.
Hello? Am I putting everybody to sleep?
Sir, they're just a little intimidated by all of this.
By the way, and not with a prostitute. I'm sorry, I was wrong. With a porn star. Not with a porn star. That's what I meant. That's
See, everybody gets it.
all right.
Right? Okay.
Not with a porn star. All right. Not with a porn star. All right.
Did Jim McGreevey, in those days leading up to his decision, did he come to you for advice? You were a mentor. What advice did you give him? Did he listen?
Well, first of all, he came to me to, the whole story is I get a call from him on a Friday. I have a house down the shore, Friday afternoon. Ray, we got to get together. Oh, okay, sure. You want to go out to dinner next week? No, I have to see you tomorrow morning. Oh, you want to have lunch? No, at your house. He comes to the house and I said, wow, this is something, Ray. And he sits down and he says, Golan Sapel is extorting me. He's accusing me of sexual assault. And he wants $50 million to be quiet. And what I found amazing about myself, I'm a lawyer. I said, okay, give me all the facts. We'll figure out how to get out of it. I didn't express, oh my God, what the hell? No thought of the emotional impact on him and all. I was acting purely as a lawyer, his lawyer. How do we get out of this? So I tried to settle the case, and I met with Sapel's lawyer, and actually settled the case for $5 billion. We could have raised that, okay. But I said, I have to have proof of the assault. Well, what do you mean you have to have proof of the assault? Well, if I just give you, your client, $5 million because of these allegations without any proof, that will be an extortion, and I'll be a party to the extortion, and so will the governor, and I ain't going to do that. So he says, no, I don't have any proof. I'm not going to give you any proof. So I said, then we have no settlement. And I walked, I went down to, the meeting was in New York, went down to Drumthwack at the governor's house. He met me in the garden. He says, Ray, I told him what happened on the phone. He said, Ray, I have to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, I think I'm gay. I said, you think you're gay? The day after he resigned, I was on Good Morning America. Matt Lauer, who ultimately was disgraced, right, himself, interviewed me, and I repeated that statement. Of course, we hugged. You can't imagine how living in your own skin, not being able to identify who you are and your feelings, what that can actually do to a person. It's unimaginable. Yeah, unimaginable. So we had this whole powwow. I did not want him to resign. I wanted him to call out Golan as an extortionist. and I'm going to stay in office. But Jamie Foxx, who was his chief of staff, convinced him that he had to resign. I think it was a mistake. I don't think he had to resign, and he shouldn't have resigned.
Let's move on to the next governor was John Corzine, who you had helped recruit to the United States Senate. Were you involved in his decision to run for governor as well?
Hell no. I mean, interesting thing because it was at that time there was a Republican governor. Who was the governor at the time?
Well, you had DeFrancesco.
DeFrancesco was governor, and the Republicans controlled both houses. So we had no really way of raising a lot of money for a campaign because they controlled all the levels of government. Jim Kennedy, mayor of Rahway at the time, said to me, "Who are we going to run to replace Frank Lautenberg?" This is for the U.S. Senate. And I said, "Some wealthy guy from Wall Street." And he said, "Well, what's his name?" I said, "I haven't found him yet." True story. True story. We found John Corzine. And, you know, I write in my book how, you know, Governor Murphy beat me by $35 million. But I can't complain because I raised that, not quite that much money to get John Corzine elected to the U.S. Senate by donating $60,000 to every county chairman in the state of New Jersey. Basically, that's what Governor Murphy did, and you know, unfortunately, that's how politics works.
Just to explain that system, let's explore
Oh, but you
that.
asked me about the governor thing. Why did he run for governor?
Did you recruit him?
No. Well, he was U.S. Senator. He did not consult with me, and he ran for governor because he wanted to be president of the United States, and he believed that you had to be governor. I don't think any not too many U.S. senators go into the presidency, I don't think. You would know, you're the...
There are a few, but it's
He
rare.
felt that being governor would give him a leg up to be president of the United States. Every governor of the state of New Jersey believes that they can be president of the United States. Every single one of them. Not one, you know, does not believe that.
Was Corzine a good governor, from your assessment?
Not particularly. I just don't think he had a good handle on coming from Goldman Sachs. That's where he was in charge. Good handle on how to make government work. I remember his treasurer, whatever his name was resigning, and he asked me for recommendations for his replacement. Not his treasurer, his chief of staff. And I said, I recommended Billy O'Day. Very, very talented freeholder, now commissioner, they're called, from Hudson County. Incredibly brilliant guy. And I said, he'll be great. And Bradley Abelow is his name. Said, well, the governor doesn't want anybody with any institutional knowledge. Thank you very much. You don't want to put somebody in charge of your administration that has any political institutional knowledge? Hello? So that's what hurt John. You know, he thought government, you know, could be run as a business, and anybody who says that's just not true. It just doesn't work that way.
So then we get to 8 years of Chris Christie.
Oh.
Okay, that's the end of the Chris Christie conversation. Look, people have said that Christie was actually a very talented politician.
Yes.
And as talented as we've seen in generation.
And he still is.
Would
And
you
he still
agree?
is. Yes. And he still is.
What makes him talented? What is it?
You know, he's frank. He's humorous. He's entertaining. And people get elected to office not necessarily by what you stand for, but whether they like you or not. That's the biggest factor in getting elected, being likable. Bill Clinton was very likable. That's why I was one of the first people to support him. I saw him on TV. I said, this guy's got it. Yeah. I remember a Speaker of the Assembly, a very talented guy, Alan Karcher, ran for governor.
My students have to read his book. They know and roll their eyes.
Okay, yeah, well, ran for governor, and he would talk to an audience and say every single thing that they wanted to hear, and they didn't want to vote for him because he just wasn't likable. The way he presented himself, he was arrogant, and he was a great guy. He was a great politician, but he just didn't have that it factor. So Christie has that it factor, but not a nice guy.
So he has the it factor, but he's still...
All right, let me tell you why he's not a nice guy. I'll tell you just two stories, and one just recent, very recent. But one story is, I'm a big animal lover. You'll read it in my book, all the legislation. Thank you. And so there's this horrible thing that farmers do to pigs, female pigs. They put them in gestation crates. They can't move. And by the way, pigs they have feelings. They get depressed. They feel pain. So pregnant sows are pregnant 80% of the time. And so they're in these cages for 80% of their life. So I passed legislation banning them. Christie was running for the Republican nomination for president, and the first presidential primary was Iowa, the home of the Pork Council. So he vetoed the bill to gain Curry support from the Iowa Pork Council. He got 2% of the vote in Iowa. Karma's a bitch, man. More recently, the Supreme Court, I've won two big cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. One was sports betting. Nobody said I had a chance to overturn the federal ban on sports betting. And more recently, the Supreme Court upheld my legislation to withdraw New Jersey from the Waterfront Commission. But the interesting thing about that is I passed legislation when Christie was governor, and he vetoed it. 3 years later, he signed the same legislation, exact, word for word. Steve Sweeney was the Senate president at the time. He said, I'll sign the legislation as long as Lesniak isn't the sponsor.
Okay, that's a
nice
tough
guy.
Yeah.
A little petty, just a little petty. That is not cool. That is not cool. Yeah.
One of the things that you are perhaps your many accomplishments is that you led the fight to repeal the death penalty here in New Jersey. You've been awarded internationally for
in France.
Leading that fight.
Correct.
You didn't get to this fight until later in your career. It wasn't something you started on.
As a matter of fact, in 1983, I voted to reinstate the death penalty. What happened was the Supreme Court had avoided all death penalty.
You're talking about the U.S.?
U.S. Supreme Court, I'm sorry. U.S. Supreme Court had declared the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment, which violated, the Fifth Amendment or one of the amendments to the Constitution? I think
You're the attorney, sir.
I know, but I'm also 77 years old, my man. But, I may run for Congress. I can't say things like that. No, I'm not running for Congress. All right. So, in any event, and then the Supreme Court reversed its decision like it did in Roe versus in Dobbs' case on abortion. But they reversed themselves, so states had to reinstate the death penalty if they wanted to have the death penalty. I voted for it. It was 1983. I was in office only a few years. It was not popular to be against the death penalty. So I went with the popular attitude. I didn't think about the morality of it. I didn't think about, the fact that you could, the likelihood of executing an innocent person, which happened. But some 83, some 15 years later, I had a spiritual conversion. I was looking at things a lot differently. And the the abolitionist people saw, somehow they saw that I would be a likely candidate to sponsor and get it through. And you know, we say in the law that bad cases make bad law. Well, what happened was, after I got it through the Senate by the bare minimum of 21 votes, there was an execution-style killing in Newark schoolyard. So, you know, when these bad stuff like that comes up, people have a visceral reaction. You know, you got to kill them. You got to get them and execute them. I don't necessarily want to go into all of the arguments. I named a few why I think the death penalty is a bad thing. By the way, most civilized countries do not have the death penalty. You know, Russia, Iran have it, North Korea have it, you know, countries like that, and America. So I don't want to get into all that, but it was a tough vote in the Assembly because of that circumstance. And Joe Roberts was the Assembly Speaker, and 3 Democrats were holding out, and he needed those 3 Democrats to vote. Roberts called me. I was in the Senate caucus. He said, "Come over to the Assembly. I just want you to walk out on the floor of the Assembly, look up at the board, and look around." I walked into the Assembly chambers. I looked up at the board. I looked around.
The board, just so we understand, the board has the list of all
yeah, the board is the green lights and the red lights.
It lists every member of the legislature and has green or red depending on whether you're voting yes or no. So when you want to see everyone press the button, okay, how do we have the votes?
Yeah.
You're looking up at this large screen.
So they saw me, a senator walking into the Assembly chambers is very unusual. I was a very unusual senator, as you can see. I looked up at the board, and all of a sudden, ding, 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 the green lights went on, and it got passed. So, and they lit up the Colosseum in Italy in honor of the death penalty being abolished in New Jersey. That was cool.
That was cool.
Yeah.
President Bill Clinton famously, who wrote the introduction to the book, famously said, "In politics, you can never have enough money."
Did he say that?
He did.
Why was he right? Wow.
So you were known for your prolific fundraising, which is one of the reasons why you actually got involved with the Clinton campaign, because you were able
I was Democratic State Chair, yes, and I was able to raise, as a matter of fact, and in those days, the rules were a lot, but there was the Citizen United case, Supreme Court case, that basically opened up the floodgates to fundraising. But in those days, only personal checks were allowed and a limit of $1,000. I was Democratic State Chair. I had a lot of people who relied on me to get things done in government, and I was able to raise a lot of money for Clinton.
That's the question I wanted to ask. What does it take to be successful in political fundraising?
Interesting. Wow, what does it take? First of all, you have to have a lot of people who owe you. You know, and it doesn't matter who you're raising money for, because they're not contributing to the person you're supporting, they're contributing because you asked them, okay? But then there are, I don't want to be cynical, I sounded way too cynical today, I don't know why it got into me, but it's because I haven't had anything to drink yet. So, here we go again. You can take that off this, in any event. But also somebody, and like I'm trying to raise money for from people who care about animal welfare laws. I started an animal-friendly political action committee, and I'm just seeking $10 contributions from 100,000 people who really care about the issue. So there are different ways to do it. You can do a small dollar contributor, or from people who want to. Or like advance their cause. In this case, people who care about ending cruelty to animals. So other people have, raised money, to to preserve abortion rights or protect the environment. Whatever, you can raise it around a cause, you're going to raise it around contacts. I prefer to raise it around a cause because I don't have any contacts anymore. I'm out of office. So that's not quite true, by the way.
There's one story I want to pull out and take this opportunity to speak
Sure.
to you about.
Aren't we going to talk about the Jersey governor's race?
Not yet.
Okay.
Somebody might have anything, but
I'm
wanna
itching
pull-
to talk about that.
I want to pull out one story you shared in your memoir. After his 1-point loss in 1997, Jim McGreevey never stopped running for governor.
Correct.
You and others were solidly behind his effort to get the nomination in 2001. But in the year 2000, U.S. Senator Bob Torricelli decided he was also interested in running for governor. And suddenly the entire Democratic establishment was asked to choose sides between these two heavyweights within the party. And it came down to the big Democratic county of Essex, home of the state's largest city, Newark, which was led at the time by its longtime and very powerful mayor, a guy named Sharp James. So during a meeting with you and others in Newark, you and Mayor James took a walk, just the two of you. And you write in your book, I know it sounds like a sinister scene from a movie about politics, but it wasn't. And I'd like to read for everybody here this passage and then ask you about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is what this senator writes, quote, I knew that Sharp James could help McGreevey, and I had an idea about how I could help Sharp. His son's nightclub was not doing well. During our walk outside, I put my arm around Sharp and mentioned that I knew his son's venture was in trouble. I told him I'd bring in one of my clients to help figure out where the club was leaking money. And if and when your son needs financial help, he'll get it, as long as he straightens out his operation, I said. James, the Mayor James, according to your telling, looked at you and said, let's go back inside and get Jim McGreevey elected governor. Now, you later explain in your book, quote, that's how politics works at its most basic level. Here's my question.
Sure.
How do you respond to those who might feel uneasy about this story, who feel that
Sure.
transactional nature of this tale is exactly what's wrong with politics in the first place? How do
Sure.
you respond to those
Sure,
people?
for two ways. Number one, I was giving away ice in the wintertime. I had investors who, if they thought it was a good investment, would invest in his business, and they knew how to run a business. His son didn't. So I wasn't giving him anything that anybody was making a contribution. They were going to invest to make money on his business. It was a business deal. Secondly, and probably most important, a few years later, the club closed down. Sharp never called me for help. He changed his mind from Torricelli to McGreevey just because I showed that I cared. And by the way, I didn't say, I'll do this if you support McGreevey. I know the business. I'm a lawyer. We could help. I could help you out. And he took kindly to that.
Wouldn't there, I'm trying to find the right way to phrase this, there might be some who would say it was understood. You didn't have to say. You were obviously negotiating about whether Sharp James sticks with McGreevey or goes with Torricelli. You take a walk outside of this big powwow meeting. Mm-hmm. You bring up the issue of his son's club. You talk about this kind of investment. It doesn't need to be said, and therefore you'll support McGreevey, right? Or wasn't that understood?
Well, as I said, I was giving away ice in the wintertime. I was helping out my clients. They weren't doing anything that they wouldn't do if it wasn't me, if they knew about the opportunity. So I didn't think I was giving away anything.
Okay.
And I wasn't. And as it turns out, I didn't.
I always wanted to ask you about that one. So I appreciate you answering, sir. We have one final traditional question we ask all of our speakers. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you were in college?
What do I know now that I wish I knew when I was in college? You know, I have no regrets. So I don't have that wish. Hey, I turned out all right.
On that note,
I mean, even though I dropped out twice, but it was all right. It turned out all right. So I'm pleased. I have no regrets.
on that note, let's thank Ray Lesniak for fascinating. Really, let me just convey to the students here, and I appreciate you coming out. Hearing it from the guy who lived it this is really a unique experience. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Senator you. We got time before we go to the book signing. We have time for just one or two questions. Has anybody got one?
Uh-oh.
Oh, okay.
The pro. This is from a pro.
I'm gonna just so that.
How about students? Good.
You read my mind. Senator, if there are any animal advocates here in the audience who might want to help us with some of the abuse laws and addressing politicians who aren't paying attention to it, should they come up and volunteer to you?
All you have to do, but first go on the Animal Friendly Pack website and donate.
Start with that.
$10. That's all it is. $10.
Any students have a question here?
Hi, Senator. Thank
Yes.
you so much. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
You passed so much legislation regarding environmental protection.
Yeah.
I'm an environmental sustainability minor, so I appreciate that. What do you think is the next front for modern and future environmental legislation? What do you think the governor and the legislature should be prioritizing?
Very interesting question. And by the way, very controversial question right now. That is a conflict with animal welfare. And I'm not suggesting that I'm taking one side or the other. And I rarely hedge my statements, as you see. But right now, there's a controversy about offshore wind and its impact, if any, on all the whales and dolphins washing up on the shore. But that's not your question. Your question is, I think.
What's the next front of?
Yeah. And I think President Biden has outlined it, and that is, owning electric cars by 2035. I think switching over to from gas guzzling. I have a hybrid. I'm not Al Gore. I'm not a hypocrite. No. I don't. Al, I love you, man.
I'll be honored if Al Gore, you're watching this video. We hope you'll come and visit Rowan University. That having been said,
But he was, after Rachel Carlson, he was the most significant environmental leader that this country has seen. But, I think switching over from gasoline to electric cars probably is the most significant thing that we can do.
let me ask you, because you brought it up, we have an upcoming governor's race. You have, in a few years, Phil Murphy's in his second term. He is term limited. He cannot run again in 2025. So we are now sitting here in April of 2023. People are beginning to announce. What is your take? What's your assessment for both parties, and what's it all going to be about?
Well, first of all, I think the Republican candidate, Ciccarelli, is the favorite to be the next governor. And there's a couple reasons for that, why I believe that. We've had very few governors elected after their party had the governors for 2 terms. I think maybe 1 or 2, if that. And plus, remember what I said about people liking you? This guy on TV, you like him. He just comes across as very likable. And that's more than half the game. So I think he's the favorite for those two reasons. You know, New Jersey has a lot of good candidates. One announced already, the mayor of Jersey City, Steve Phillip, who took a cheap shot at Rutgers football team the other day that I wasn't happy about. About the Rutgers strike, you know, he said, we're paying too much for athletics only to have a second-rate football team. That annoyed me because what about these kids who are playing on that team? There was no reason for a politician to take a cheap shot like that. Okay, but in any event, he's a strong candidate. He has a war chest of what, $10–12 million. The Hudson County Democratic Organization line, which is a big vote. And then there's Mickey Sherrill, who is a congresswoman from Morris County, very attractive candidate, good congresswoman, I think Marine helicopter. So, you know, she has a great resume as a female. I think that will help her in the election if she runs. We don't know if she is or not. Of course, there's Steve Sweeney from South Jersey, former Senate president, who ran into a buzzsaw when he lost his election as Senate president because of two reasons that he had no control over. Joe Biden was very unpopular, and so was Phil Murphy at the time. Because what happened, Phil Murphy said, if property taxes is your concern, then New Jersey isn't the state for you. And
Indeed, he said it right here at Rowan
Is that right?
University.
Shut up. I saw that on TV. I said, this is not good. This is not good. And Ciccarelli had it on TV. So when Sweeney lost, people weren't voting for him or against him. They were voting Republican as opposed to Democrat. So he's a I think he would make a great governor, by the way. He's a great Senate president. Anyone else? Who am I missing?
People talk about potentially Ross Baraka. They talk about potentially Speaker Craig Coughlin.
And nobody talks about Sheila Oliver. How come? No, seriously. She's African-American,
She's a lieutenant
female,
governor.
lieutenant governor now, and yet she's not in the mix. I don't understand why not. Maybe she's expressed no interest. But she's a very good friend. She would be a great candidate. Okay, you want me to tell you somebody that nobody talks about?
Let's hear it.
Sean Spiller. You know who he is?
I do.
Mayor of Montclair,
And the president of the New Jersey
president
Education
of the
Association.
NJEA, African American. In a Democratic primary, NJEA could raise $6 to $8 million for him in a heartbeat. By the way, he's a great guy. I love him. And he comes across really well. Remember what I told you about likable? He's very, very likable. And because he's the head of the teachers union, he will have thousands of volunteers to go door to door for him. So you remember, you heard it here first.
Why don't we just wrap it up, Senator? I want to give you the last word. Is there any final words of wisdom? The room is largely filled with many students. Is there any final bit of advice you'd like to offer before we close out?
Yeah. You know what I tell I teach class in advocacy at Kean University, and I think the most important thing for students to learn is critical thinking. Being able to challenge, you know, the conventional wisdom, and knowledge is good. It's important to have knowledge so that you can challenge it, but knowledge is almost useless unless you are able to use it in a way to change things, to have an opinion that has validity in your life, no matter what career you choose. Think about your approach to whatever in life, any aspect of life, not just career, student, politics, any aspect of life. You know, think things through and be able to see both sides of it. I think that's the most important thing for any student and actually for any person.
On that note, let's thank again.
Thank you. Thank you.